It was clear during the pandemic and post-pandemic, it's the same, where one has to focus on being more agile. And what we saw during the pandemic was that essentially companies needed to think on their feet, to change the way they operated, to look at more of a digital model. From my perspective, having lived all over the world and having had exposure to various cultures, although I had a Sri Lankan passport, I didn't necessarily have any of the background, any of the heritage. So that was one aspect. The second was I felt there was an opportunity, having studied in another country, to come back to Sri Lanka and really get engaged and see what I could do for the country as well. So those are the two drivers. So the journey in Sri Lanka, in a very concise manner, really thought I was coming back to a sedate life and build a house by the beach, find a decent job and chill, but never worked out that way. I worked at LOLC for a year and a half. Wonderful place, did some business engineering, got acclimatized to Sri Lanka, and then joined MAS and helped them on their whole SAP journey for 13 years, and then came to Brandix, first of all to sort out and structure their ERP initiatives, and then set up Brandix i3, which is Fortude, and never looked back since. And honestly, I never thought that I would move back to Sri Lanka and see so much of the world from Sri Lanka. After moving back to Sri Lanka, I essentially ended up traveling to almost 40 countries. I lived again in Hong Kong, the UK, the US for a while. Again, reasonably short stints apart from the one in the UK and Hong Kong. But it was fantastic. So people, when they ask me, why did you come back to Sri Lanka? I said, well, I love it, I enjoy it. And despite all the ups and downs we've gone through as a country, we've achieved so much. So from a decision-making point of view, what is difficult for most leaders and what I found pre-pandemic in terms of the decisions you had to make and post-pandemic, to be honest, it was during the pandemic that things were tough. One had to really figure out how to navigate during the pandemic. And I think post-pandemic, it's returning to a new normal where, again, customers are keen to meet. They were virtual, but they are keen to meet face to face. They're keen to interact, to negotiate. But the wonderful thing is, pre-pandemic, doing something virtually wasn't necessarily as acceptable. Now it is. So it's a great alternative. I think that's the first one. In terms of decision making about key initiatives, how to manage people, for example, it's very different now. I think from a people perspective, one has to be clear that people have got used to hybrid way of work, some to not coming into work at all, and I truly believe that as leaders we have to figure out how to get the best out of our people, and that means customized solutions post-pandemic, especially in the knowledge sector, in IT. It's important that we have that perspective and the people's interest at heart when we actually deliver and make decisions. So essentially the first one I'd like to call out is the move to the cloud. Now that's been in play for a while. A lot of companies have moved to the cloud. However, I think from my perspective, what I'm seeing is a trend to what's called the industry cloud, where companies are coming together in a specific industry. And I feel there's going to be an opportunity for an industry to actually set up in the cloud. And that seems to be something that it might happen over the next year. The second is around the metaverse. And really, if you look at it, certain companies have already started leveraging the metaverse for collaboration. Actually, rather than leveraging that whole concept for collaboration, for training, for their development needs. And the third area is really around adaptive AI, where essentially, moving on from the standard norms of AI, where there are opportunities for learning and that learning to be pushed back into the technology. So I think those are the three I would call out. So in terms of leadership and resilience, I think it was clear during the pandemic and post-pandemic, it's the same, where one has to focus on being more agile. And what we saw during the pandemic was that essentially companies needed to think on their feet, to change the way they operated, to look at more of a digital model to operate. Even simple things like having meetings had to be done virtually. So I think from that perspective, for me, resilience goes hand in hand with the whole aspect of being agile, because one has to continue to be agile, because coming out of the pandemic, we're now in a potential global recession. The whole ball game is changing, and essentially if you look at it, if you're not agile and if you aren't proactive to that change, it becomes more and more difficult. I think for a lot of businesses our size, as well as even larger enterprises, there has to be more agile thinking. There has to be the ability to change the way we work and how we work with our customers.